Off a day and welcome to Congressman Michael San Nicolas' press conference, an update on the coronavirus relief package. With us today are our Guam media partners. Thank you for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, Guam's representative to the U.S. Congress, Congressman Michael San Nicolas.
Off a day, I hope everyone's doing all right given the circumstances. Would like to thank the people of Guam for giving us the opportunity to continue serving them in this capacity and to be able to provide these updates on the critical relief that everyone is looking forward to. I also wanted to thank our media partners for their participation today, and I look forward to not only being able to reach out to your listening and viewing and reading audience, but also being able to answer any questions you may have with the information that we provide. As some of you may have seen recently in national news coverage, there's been significant movement in being able to secure a new round of relief. And earlier I put out a press release that there is common ground being found between the White House and the House of Representatives. That common ground is centered primarily around the need for additional stimulus funding, an acknowledgement that unemployment support needs to continue in some form, acknowledgement that businesses are going to continue to need support as well. And we wanted to be able to highlight the specifics of what the new package coming out of the House is going to look like, particularly for Guam, for our people, for our businesses, for our government. And so without any other objections, we'll just go ahead and begin. The first item that we were able to clarify, just for edification, the bill is about 1,200 pages long. And so if there's any questions that anybody may have at the conclusion of this, we'll be more than happy to answer them with the information that we have available, or get the facts and reconnect with you to be able to clarify. But first up, we have what everyone is looking forward to, and that is the stimulus payments, otherwise known as the economic impact payments. Those are going to be continued under the new legislation. The amounts are $1,200 to each family member, up to $6,000 per household. Some of the changes that were addressed in this new legislation were the common headaches that a lot of our people encountered, and is a common headache that's encountered throughout the country. This new language will allow for claimed dependent children up to 24 years old, but they must be in college if they're over the age of 18. Claimed non-child adult dependents are qualified. And so this was particularly important for those who have elderlies in their household or people with disabilities that are adults. They will be included in the clarifying language. Also clarified, and what was a headache in many constituencies across the country, was the subject of having families where one member was a U.S. citizen or had a social security number and another member was not. The IRS has been interpreting that those, what they call mixed families, are excluded under the CARES Act. This new language clarifies that and makes sure that they are included as well. Moving on, we have also a hot button issue is the unemployment compensation and the ability for that to continue. This new language also maintains unemployment support, not only the $345 approximately in the pandemic unemployment assistance, but an additional $600 that was previously provided in the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, the FPUC. That in this language is backdated all the way to July 31st. And so when the FPUC discontinued on August 1, and there's been back and forth and some executive orders carrying a portion of it through in the months since, this language is going to go back and backdate that and fund that to everybody who was eligible all the way back to August 1st. So there will be a similar to when we rolled out the unemployment, there's going to be a significant lump sum to those who qualify, and assuming, of course, the language becomes law. Next hot button item is the rental assistance that many people have been concerned about. We've heard the concerns from landlords, we've heard the concerns from homeowners. The eviction moratoriums are particularly stressful for those who are renting out their properties, because there are some concerns that the inability to evict is causing losses in revenue, and there's nothing that the homeowner can do to be able to make up for that. The rental assistance is continued in this second round of language as it was in the original language. And this language also originated in the Financial Services Committee. Guam, for rental assistance, will receive $66.9 million. 60% of these funds must be expended within 2 years. 100% of the funds must be expended within 3 years. And so this gives us an opportunity to be able to provide rental assistance on an as-needed basis. We don't need to burn it all up front. And we can also mix and match the rental assistance with the forbearance that we've already passed that's carrying forward on those federally backed properties under Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae, VA, FHA, rural development. All of those federally backed loans have forbearance all the way up until March of 2020. So this will give us an opportunity to be able to pair those up. Some additional detail on the rental assistance. Qualifying criteria for tenants or renters. They have to have an income below 80% of the median area income as determined by HUD. And they have to have an inability to attain or maintain housing stability or have insufficient resources to pay for rent. Now, when it comes to qualifying the income, a concern that many people had was, my income was much higher before this pandemic. It's dropped off significantly since this pandemic. What are you counting as income? In determining income for households, the calculation of income performed at the time of application for such assistance, including arrearages, shall only consider income that the household is currently receiving. So if you've been furloughed, if you've been laid off, that zero income would be the income that is used to calculate. So you don't need to worry about your earlier income becoming a factor to exclude you. If you've been adversely impacted by the economic circumstances, you're going to be able to qualify. The maximum amount of rental assistance that may be provided shall be the greater of the fair market rent established by the HUD Secretary for the area, or such higher amount as the HUD Secretary shall determine is needed to cover market rents in the area. We all have an understanding of median rents and what that means. And that calculation is available, and Guru can provide that. But if there's a need for us to have a different calculation, that can be considered. There will be an eviction moratorium coming along with that rental assistance. And so you won't get kicked out of your house for not paying your rent, but your landlord will also be able to go out there and seek rental assistance, similar to the way Section 8 landlord is able to do it. And so this program on the rental assistance will be direct payments to the landlords, not to the tenants. The eviction moratorium will be for a 12-month period. And on the subject of homeowner assistance, we have $29 million being provided in the homeowner assistance fund. Not less than 60% of the funds shall be used to assist homeowners having incomes equal to or less than 80% of the median income. And again, similar to the rental assistance, the determination of household income, or that 60%, will be based on what your current income circumstances are now, not what your income circumstances may have been prior to the pandemic. The remaining 40% of the homeowner assistance fund can be used for those who are not below 80% of the area median income. And so assuming that we have a large applicant pool of people whose incomes are still higher on a household basis than 80% of the median income, they were adversely impacted perhaps, but not to a point to fall below that threshold. There's still 40% of the 29 million that will be available for those qualifying households. Moving on to our business community, we have another round of Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. Again, this is going to be similar to what we've received in the CARES Act. 300 million approximately is what we can anticipate for our territory, given what we received under the CARES Act. Just some clarifications. The covered period will be defined as a period selected by the borrower between 8 and 24 weeks. So the forgiveness calculation that uses the term covered period aligns proportionally. So the business can go in, they can say, we want a PPP loan for 8 weeks, or we want one for 24 weeks. That will be decided by the business owner. What's very, very different about this one, because we saw how in the initial rollout of PPP, there was a stampede at the door, the system got inundated, a lot of smaller communities and smaller businesses had a hard time getting their PPP basically. This new language will also create a prioritized PPP loan product to give second PPP loans of up to $2 million to certain small businesses with less than 200 employees that have suffered demonstrably quarterly revenue losses of at least 25%. Now, with all of our lockdowns, most of our businesses will be qualifying for this. A lot of our employers are below 200 employees. $2 million in revenue is, some businesses do a lot more than that, but a lot of our smaller businesses on Guam are below that. And this is going to help our businesses get through the door a lot easier than when we had the bottleneck under the CARES Act. It expands the definition of nonprofits as well. I received messages from several nonprofit organizations and churches. All nonprofit organizations will be included to be eligible for this second round of PPP. Just to clarify as well, if you received a PPP loan under CARES, you are eligible to reapply for this new round of PPP. So this is round 2, and everybody is going to be able to avail of it. A new item that's being included in the language is an SBA Lifeline grant program. This creates a Lifeline grant program for small businesses with 50 or fewer employees that have suffered an economic loss of at least 30%. Businesses applying for an EIDL loan can request such grant from the Small Business Administration. Firms will receive the lesser of working capital needed for 180 days under the EIDL calculations, or $50,000. Loan proceeds can be used in the same way as a COVID EIDL loan. It can be used to repay PPP or EIDL loans. And investments required to implement business community development strategies as a result of the pandemic. So if you had to make some major adjustments to your enterprise, you have 50 or fewer employees, you're going to be able to apply for this grant if you need to, put in plastic sheeting in order to protect your employees during transactions. If you want to put in any other safeguards, these grants will be available for you. And that is on top of the payroll protection plan loans, the PPP second round. There's also a small business local relief program. It establishes a local grant program in the Treasury, which will be administered by the SBA. This is going to the entire country, $15 billion in funding to states and local governments to provide grants to small businesses through a network of community-based partners. Funding shall be used for purposes of a small business emergency fund and providing support to organizations that provide technical assistance to small firms. Relief is targeted to small businesses with 20 or fewer employees, or business with 50 or fewer if they are located in low-income neighborhoods. So you can see how we're tiering business support. We're having PPP, but we're also making sure that the smaller enterprises are going to be able to get through the door. And then we're having SBA Lifeline grants for those even smaller enterprises, and then small business local relief programs for the smallest of enterprises. And so the Congress has done a lot of work to be able to make sure that we tier this up properly so that the small enterprises are going to be able to get a fair shot at the relief that's needed for their operations. And that's consistent with the country. This entire country is built on the backs of small businesses. And while it's important for us to always make sure that all enterprises are looked after during this pandemic, we must make sure that the backbone of our national economy, as well as the economy of Guam, is receiving the support that it needs and not getting bottlenecked out because of the demand. We also had a conversation about special support that's being provided for restaurants and food and beverage establishments. And there's going to be specific language in this bill strictly for those industries. It's the one thing that actually saw an increase in the negotiated amounts that were clarified. And so for those establishments on Guam, I know that that's many of our businesses, particularly those that are experiencing significant frustrations with the lockdowns. Your food and beverage establishments are going to be getting special support through this new legislation. The caveats are that the businesses need to be able to avail of these resources, and they have to be outside of being publicly traded, which is a really big problem on our island. And they cannot be franchise operations, because franchise operations are able to go through their master franchisee, pursue additional funding that's available through things like the Main Street Lending Program that is being administered by the Federal Reserve. I know that many of our local businesses may have been looking into the Main Street Lending Program But the challenge is that we need local banks to be able to stand up that program. And we've communicated with the local banks, and we're hoping that they're going to make that available for the larger enterprises to take advantage of. Aside from that relief for businesses, we move on to relief for government, and this is a real significant development that we acknowledge needs to have traction. The Coronavirus Relief Fund will provide a significant amount to states and local governments, but specifically for Guam, the local government of Guam, if we are able to pass this language, will receive $1.17 billion for operations. Now that's very significant, because the new language is also going to allow the funds to be used for not only COVID-19 related expenses, but to replace foregone revenues not projected on January 2020, or, and this is key, to respond to negative economic impacts of COVID-19. To respond to negative economic impacts of COVID-19. And so we've had a lot of conversation on Guam about the need to reduce the business privilege tax. We've had a lot of conversations on Guam about the need to provide for operational support for commercial enterprises. If these are valid negative impacts related to COVID-19, we can definitely address that. And so just on glancing at the government of Guam budget, this $1.17 billion is actually more than what we've budgeted for FY 2021. And if you just give me a minute, I wanted to have a clarifying conversation about how these resources can be used to address the issues of taxation and the ability for our local government to meet halfway all of this federal support for the benefit of our recovery and the sustainability of our enterprises going into 2021. The budget of the government of Guam for FY 2021 came out at $950 million. So this $1.17 billion can fully replace and add extra to the government of Guam budget. That extra is going to be critical because we have so many new needs to be able to fund in terms of, educational resources and being able to provide help to the other parts of our community that haven't been able to get the support they've been needing because our local resources are not enough and our federal resources have too many requirements in order for them to be able to move. But on the business privilege tax alone, the budget for that was $304 million. And so we can help our local businesses. If we get this $1.17 billion and this language is consistent in responding to negative economic impacts of COVID-19, the local government can wipe out business privilege tax entirely for 2021. We can zero out the gross receipts taxes that our businesses are paying, business privilege tax, and give a major tax relief to our businesses at a time when revenue is already under strain and additional taxes on top of revenues that are under serious stress. I mean, that's just, it's just incredible to imagine, but it's the reality that our businesses are faced with. We can zero out business privilege tax if we get these resources for Guam. On top of that, we can even create income tax rebates, particularly if those rebates are going to be going to individuals that can demonstrate that they've had negative economic impacts. We just got to build out the criteria. This is where the government of Guam is going to have to really do a lot of legwork, but it's just part of the process and sign of the times. We're in a very, very unique place right now because while all this discussion is going on for a new round of relief, there is it's hard to predict whether or not there's going to be a third round of relief similar to this. We got CARES, we got what's called Heroes 2.0 now. I don't know if there's going to be a 3.0. And so the decisions that we make with these available resources need to be done in a manner where we're going to not only provide for the immediate relief, but do so in a way that's going to put as much resources into the pockets of our people for them to be able to get through the entirety of 2021, maybe even as much of 2022 as possible, so that the timeline that we need for the pandemic to subside and normalcy to return coincides with the resources that we've received now. We really should not be operating under the assumption that there's going to be, an endless pool of resources after this. But this is significant enough, and I believe that if we make the right decisions with this, we're going to be able to achieve what I'm describing. On top of the coronavirus relief fund, the 1.17 billion, there's still more, and these are incredibly significant. For education, there's specific funding for education on top of that $1.17 billion. There's a state fiscal stabilization fund, which would be dispersed to governors for support of elementary, secondary, and post-secondary education, as well as early childhood education programs and services. This fiscal stabilization fund can be used for operations. And the amount that Guam is estimated to receive is $364 million. Now, there was a lot of news over the course of the budget discussions about the concerns from the Department of Education that the amounts that were allotted to them in the GovGuam budget were far below what they need to not only operate on a normal basis, but to operate under these pandemic circumstances. This $364 million is right up there with the amount that the Department of Education was asking for, and in fact can be paired with the DOE appropriations. And if they reconfigure the local tax assumptions, we can pump a historic amount of money into education. And we can do so with this $364 million covering the operational aspect and the original appropriations to DOE going to much needed capital improvements. We can fund deferred maintenance. We can fund a new Simon Sanchez High School. We can fund rebuilding our schools or fixing our schools in ways that we never would have previously imagined. And so this $364 million in the state fiscal stabilization fund is on top of the $1.17 billion on the coronavirus relief fund. There is a second funding source that's coming for education, and that is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Facilities Fund. And so even the federal government is going to be providing some facility support on top of the operational support. That amount is lower, it's $8.75 million, but it's still facilities money coming from the federal government for our school system. On the subject of healthcare, this is again, very, very significant language. Guam is expected to receive $446 million that can be used for building hospitals and critical infrastructure on our island. Now I've grown up, and we've all grown up pretty much listening to the challenges of GMH. This can take care of GMH. This can get us a new facility. This can really make us state of the art in terms of healthcare in the region and competitive with the rest of Asia. And this is very, very important for us to get right, because the ability for us to attract our tourists back to Guam is going to weigh heavily on our ability to market ourselves as a destination that is going to be able to look after their healthcare as well as the healthcare of our community. With these new funds being able to really bolster our healthcare system on Guam, we not only will be providing the state-of-the-art healthcare that our people have been looking for a very, very long time and really struggling with in terms of budgets and the availability of resources, but it's going to actually be the key to us being able to get our economy back and reopening our tourism industry. So this $446 million for building hospitals and critical infrastructure is again on top of the $1.17 billion that is in the coronavirus relief fund. And it just represents a significant amount of resources that's going to be able to be used to build capacity. And that's, I think, something that we need to prioritize. I want to put this on the record. These funds, this isn't the time to really go out there and try and hit a home run with glamorous architecture. This is an opportunity for us to build capacity, not just for today, but for the next 30 years, for the next 50 years. Let's use this money and let's build a hospital that's going to last us as long as we need it to and provide for our community as it grows. And finally, and this is also a very, very big development, is language is in this second round of relief for earned income tax credit reimbursement to the government of Guam at 75%. And so again, this is shaping up to be around approximately $40 million that the government of Guam is not going to have to pay in tax refunds because the federal government is going to reimburse this. This language is in here for this relief package, and it's written in such a way that it's not only going to be for fiscal year 2021, but it's going to be continuous thereafter. And so in the event that the federal government were to change any EITC formulas, create new EITC benefits for those who qualify, this 75% will continue to offset any of those increases. And so basically it'll be the federal government putting more dollars back into the hands of our people with their income tax credit program, and the local government receiving a significant reimbursement of that, which has also historically been a real significant revenue concern, not only for the government of Guam, but for our rating agencies, who have commented that if we ameliorate EITC, it will, in and of itself, all these other funding opportunities aside, ameliorate the financial stress that Guam experiences on an annualized basis. That is our general rundown right now of what we can provide as far as information for what this new package contains. I know that I've spoken for a while, and I've kind of elaborated on some of my hopeful, visionary type things that we can do, pairing up local resources, giving out local tax breaks, and using federal dollars to meet us all in the middle and make things happen very effectively. But I wanted to make myself available to questions from our media partners that might be on the minds of your listening, viewing, and reading audience. So at this time, I'll go ahead and pause for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Congressman San Nicolas, for those important updates. Half-a-Day Media Partners, questions will now be taken at this time. Please click on the raise hand icon to be recognized. Once recognized, we ask that media partners please state your name and respective media outlet for record purposes.
Hi, sir. This is Anamita with Pacific Daily News. What is the likelihood that this will pass Senate?
The good news is that we have, as I mentioned in my opening, common ground between the White House and the House. Negotiations were really stalled out over the past month, but there have been recent conversations between the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, who is representing the administration, and our leadership in the House. And so the key is going to be whether we can find compromise between 2 out of the 3, because even the Senate's proposals are not satisfactory to the White House. They don't include stimulus language. The White House feels that it is underwhelming in terms of its ability to provide the kind of relief that they're envisioning. And so because we're having a breakthrough right now, this new round, I think, has a high chance of gaining traction. Just to clarify, the original HEROES Act was $1 trillion more expensive. We were able to reduce the cost of this version by $1 trillion. And so that's significant because it's bringing us closer to finding a compromise amount. And what's also significant is, historically, when the federal government needs to cut in order to make the numbers work, territories were always number one on the chopping block. That's different this time around. We have secured significant resources for Guam, and I wanted to credit all of my other territorial colleagues because we've been ferocious advocates for making sure that the territories are going to be included in all the final packages. I did want to absolutely credit our leadership in the House, who have over and over again, every time we bring it up, because we do it almost like broken records, but we do it because we just got to make sure that it's on the table and it's heard in every call and in every meeting. They've always, over and over again, reassured that territories are going to be included. And so we're confident this package is going to find new traction given its lower price tag, given the common ground that's being found between the House and the White House. And we're very excited that while we've been able to save $1 trillion, it hasn't been at the expense of territories. And that is an incredible thing.
Thank you. And then I just have one more question before I pass it on to my colleagues. You said that there will be an extension of the $600 FPUC backdated to July 31st. Until when would that be in effect? Would it be through the end of this year?
That will be continued until January 31st, 2021. And so it'll be just until the end of the first month of next year. And that's a very good question, Anamita, because that's why it's important for us to really think about things like reducing the BPT or creating a tax holiday on BPT, because when the unemployment programs end at the end of January, we want to make sure that our businesses that are going to be pumped with PPP and pumped with SBA grants are also going to be able to have the local support of tax relief, so that we can maximize as much hiring as possible, even if our markets are still struggling to return to normal. So the unemployment under this new Heroes 2.0 will conclude January 31st, 2021. Of all the items that I've described, and I know I mentioned earlier that it will be difficult to get any new funding, if the employment circumstances of the country don't improve, they have been, but they're still historically high. If those circumstances don't improve, there may be more unemployment conversations, but those are very, very premature at this time. I think everyone wants to try and move forward a new version of relief, and then see where the economy and the country pretty much holds up on its own. So that's pretty much when the PUA will be expiring, and why we need to have a very broad point of view in trying to make sure that our private sector is going to get the support that it needs to be able to absorb the employment circumstances of our people. Because as much as the unemployment has been helping, I know our people are hardworking people. Everyone wants to get back to work, and so the more we can help that happen, the better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anamita, for your questions. Congressman, next up for questions, Mr. Troy Torres.
Hi, Congressman. This is Troy with the candidate, and Johnny's here with me. Thank you for this news conference. A couple questions. One is just a clarification. I missed the part where you talked about a new round of EIP. How much was it again? I caught the part about the dependents and non-child dependents. I just didn't catch the number. Sorry for burdening me with that.
No problem. That's what this is all for here. The EIP. The notes that I have here is that it's $1,200 to each family member, up to $6,000 per household.
Oh, okay. We'll be reporting that. And then there's a general concern that federal money isn't being let out as quickly or as efficiently as should be with the government of Guam. Are there any accountability measures in place or any sort of stipulations in any of these programs that says, Guam, you can't let the money sit in the bank, you need to do something with it so that it helps the intended recipients?
There is funding for the Inspector General to come in and look at all of this during and after its administration. And so we're going to definitely be able to see all of that. The rollout of funds has been a concern on Guam. It's also a concern that has been in a number of other districts as well. And actually that's kind of been it's been a sticking point in the negotiations for a while, because the argument was, why are you asking for more money when you haven't even spent the money we gave you yet? And so, we're working around those arguments and trying to get additional support. But absolutely, the better our timelines are in terms of deploying resources, the stronger our arguments are for more resources. And so, I really think that, I've been seeing reports of how the expenditure rate is, there's room for improvement. And we're hoping that can improve, because we want to send the right signals that, the reality on the ground is we need the funds, and we want to make sure we're not creating a false reality that our inability to expend those funds means that we're doing okay, because we're not. And that's why, one of the things that we've been suggesting over the past couple of months have been using some of the funds that are sitting, using that for paying essential workers. We provided a model that's being used in Pennsylvania We provided that to the local government for them to be able to take that on, because there are districts in the country that are doing that. We also provided examples of how CARES Act funds, not just HUD grants, but actual CARES Act funds that are held in reserve are being used in other districts for rental assistance right now. And so, we're providing that information. We're really trying to be as helpful as possible in terms of giving ideas and examples of how the resources can be used, because from day one, we not only understood the need for us to secure relief, but the need for us to get that relief out, and how getting that relief out not only helps our people, but communicates the need for us to continue receiving support.
Finally, Congressman, I don't know if you've seen an April 2020 report from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers regarding the state of Guam Memorial Hospital. But in this report, it essentially says what you were talking about earlier, and that was the possibility of using the 447 million, I think it was, and 446 million in health funds for the possible construction of a new hospital. Have you seen this report? And can you expand on your thoughts on the construction of a new hospital?
We're familiar with the report. The Army Corps has always done good work in being able to really give us an unbiased assessment of what the facts are and the realities are. And so and that's why we're so excited about this 446 million. That's a significant amount of money, almost $500 million to build a hospital for a community of 170,000. I'm hoping we also factor in how we are realistically speaking the regional option for our brothers and sisters in the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and then also considering capacity for our tourists, so that there's going to be availability to provide high quality medical services for our people, for our neighbors, and for our visitors. And the Army Corps report highlights not only what we know anecdotally, but it underscores the need for us to make sure that this 446 million is deployed with a long-term solution in mind. And whether it's a new hospital, which I think really would probably be the best route, that's really a final decision that the local government is going to have to make. But we're very happy that with the passage of this act, really hoping that we get it through, that we're going to be able to provide the federal resources to get it done.
Thank you, Congressman.
For questions, Mr. John O'Connor, you are recognized.
Thank you, Congressman. I have a few questions here regarding the money for the government of Guam, and one or two questions regarding education. So I think I'll break it down. The 1.17 billion, how does that compare to the amount allocated in the CARES Act? And does the 1.17 apply to fiscal 2020 and 2021, or just 2021?
So the 1.17 billion is literally almost 10 times more than what was provided under the CARES Act. The significant difference is that the new language that we have here makes the monies able to be used very clearly for operational expenses. It can be very clearly used to replace foregone revenues, and it can be very clearly used to respond to negative economic impacts of COVID-19. The $117 million the government of Guam received was not as flexible. There were still other districts, like I mentioned earlier, that were able to find workarounds to provide essential pay for essential workers or rental assistance. There are programs out there using CARES Act funds and not having them sit idle. But this new round of funding of 1.17 billion definitely has a lot less restrictions, and is basically an operational fund for the government of Guam to be able to meet its operational costs. The monies will replace revenues not projected in January 31st, 2020. They'll be deposited into the government of Guam coffers within 30 days of passage of this act. And so if there's any expenses they have carried over, they can absolutely, for the previous fiscal year, they can absolutely use it for that. as long as it fits within all the parameters that I mentioned. But again, these parameters are a lot more broad. So they can use it for prior year, they can use it for the next fiscal year. There is no fiscal year requirement. There is simply the requirement that it meets the COVID-19 related expenses, replaces foregone revenues not projected on January 31st, 2020, or is used to respond to negative economic impacts of COVID-19.
Thank you for that. I was wondering if you can just expand on its uses a bit more, because based on what you were saying, it sounds like not only can that money be used to address shortfalls in the government's revenue, it can also be used to, with what you were saying with the BPT, used to replace what was local funds. That almost sounds too generous to me. So perhaps can you provide a breakdown or specifications on what that funding can be used for and what requirements are tied to that 1.17 billion?
Again, it's all related to what I explained. The key to being able to use these funds for local revenue offsets will be, the key is how we phrase and how we pursue the offset. So for example, we can make a very clear case that lowering BPT and using the 1.17 billion to backfill that is a financial mechanism that is being deployed by the government of Guam to respond to the negative economic impacts of COVID-19. Because the negative economic impacts of COVID-19 has completely dried up our tourism market, our business revenues are tanked, and the taxation at the local level of these businesses is contributing to the financial hardship of these businesses that are suffering a negative economic impact of COVID-19. And so being able to use these resources to offset what would have been business privilege tax revenues that were reduced in order to support businesses suffering a negative economic impact of COVID-19 is a linear deduction that can be made to comply with the intended use of the funds. And so these the coronavirus relief fund and many of these other programs, the House and the legislation is different at the federal level than it is at the local level. Locally, we have a tendency to not only write the bill and put in the funding and put in all the restrictions, line items. Federally, the language and the restrictions sometimes are there, but they always keep them very broad to allow for agency interpretation. And so at the end of the day, this 1.17 billion, how it's going to be used and whether or not it's going to be used for the purposes that I described is going to depend on agency interpretation. And that interpretation is going to depend on the effectiveness that the local government, the effectiveness of the case that the local government is going to have to make in order to be able to utilize the resources in that way. And so that's why it's important that we're putting it on the record right now, because we want to make sure that all options are on the table and that those conversations are happening even now and definitely after passage of the act. We want those to be happening right away and not months later, because the sooner we get those green lights, the sooner we'll be able to exercise these options.
Thank you, Congressman. For education, I believe you said 350 million. The Guam Department of Education got about 50 million in Education Stabilization Fund, but one of the issues with that was this maintenance of effort requirement. I'm wondering if there's a similar requirement for the 350 million, or if there's another type of requirement that you can specify.
I need to clarify that, because the maintenance of effort language, that's not what was written in any of the legislation that we drafted. So I need to clarify whether or not there is a maintenance of effort language in the Fiscal Stabilization Fund. I'll go ahead and leave it at that. I don't want to speculate as to how the maintenance of effort conversation originated on Guam. But I will say that, the budgetary circumstances of the department are such that, they definitely need to make every case they possibly can to get as much support as they can secure. And so, perhaps there was conversations about the 50 million being able to be used as an offset, and perhaps the maintenance of effort argument was a case being made by the department to not have that be the case, and wisely so, because those funds really should have been prioritized for the new realities that we have in distance learning and in PPE requirements, and buying computers and getting Wi-Fi hotspots up. So yeah, I wanted to clarify whether or not there's going to be any actual maintenance of effort language in that state fiscal stabilization fund. But again, that's not language that was actually written in the CARES Act, and it's not written in the HEROES Act.
Okay, let me squeeze in one more question. That's with the EITC. Did you say there was a 75% reimbursement on EITC? Let me just clarify that one.
Yes, 75%.
Okay. Do you know what that amounts to, essentially, in terms of money?
You know, I'm putting on my Guam senator hat and trying to dig back into my fuzzy memory. I believe that back in my day, we were spending about $56 million in EITC. And so just real quick, 75% of that will be about $42 million in reimbursement.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Congressman.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. For questions, Mr. Nestor Lecanto, you are recognized.
Thank you. Good afternoon, or I guess it's late evening where you're at, Congressman. I wanted to go back to that 1.17 billion because I think that's very significant. How did you arrive at that number, 1.17 billion?
The package was based on a 9.5 billion to assist territorial governments, and it was based on the I believe it was a population calculation. And so we received our portion of that based on our size, and that was formulaic based on the HEROES Act. And to my understanding, that formula was maintained based on the original amount of 9.5 billion. So that's our share. The territories are getting, they're all getting their respective share.
Okay, understood. So how would it be paid out? Because I think if I understood you correctly, you were suggesting that perhaps we could give a tax holiday to businesses by zeroing out GRT. But the government, as you know, relies on monthly tax receipts to pay, all of its debts and its payroll and that sort of thing. So would this be a lump sum payment or would it be a monthly payment? How would it be doled out?
It will be $1.17 billion direct deposited into the government of Guam within 30 days of enactment of the act. So we will actually have a full fiscal year plus 10% funded up front within 30 days.
Okay. And can you explain foregone revenues not projected? So what exactly would the government of Guam have to show to the federal government in order to avail of the 1.17 billion?
The 1.17 billion will be fully received. In order to account for its expenditure, they have to fit within those particular categories. And so on the specific one that you're asking for on replace foregone revenues not projected, like let's say, for example, there was a BPT revenue projection or an income tax. Let's use income tax since we don't want to get too confused in mixing them up. Let's say that the income tax projections for FY 2021, we pull those up real quick and we can see, give me 1 second here, GovGuam's FY 2021. We have a GovGuam income tax. So let's say individual income tax was projected at 71 million. If for whatever reason, let's say the unemployment expires on January 31st and the income tax revenues totally fall out because there is still no employment. If those revenues drop below what was projected, then those would also count as foregone revenue not projected. So anything less than what we thought we were going to get could be used out of the 1.17 billion.
Okay, and sorry. And finally, just to manage expectations, when do you think Congress will take action on this? Before November 3rd or post election?
Very soon. The negotiations have ramped up significantly last week and this week. It's possible that we will have this thing clear the House before the end of this week, and then the ball will be in the Senate's court. Because, like I mentioned earlier, there is a common ground between the White House and the House the Senate may find itself in a new position where they're going to have to really come back to the table to get us through in some fashion. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic more so than I was back in late July, early August, when the original movements for relief were happening. Things have intensified, especially with the president having to use his executive orders, and with those executive orders, like for example, with the unemployment backstop running out, something needs to happen, and that's going to be an inflection point.
All right, thank you, and I'll defer to my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Lecanto. Mr. Wayne Charkbalov, you are recognized for questions.
Afternoon, Congressman. This is Wayne Charkbalov from PNC News. And my question is, the original HEROES Act was about $3 trillion, and the current version is about $2 trillion. Could you talk about how that price was brought down? Were certain things given up, that kind of thing?
The biggest area the House had to step back from was the area that the White House and the Senate were absolutely unwilling to entertain, and that was pay for essential workers. We had $1 trillion that was going out to essential workers in the original HEROES Act. Unfortunately, the Senate, that was just a non-starter. And the House, that was not common ground that they were willing to stand on. And so a huge chunk of the $1 trillion was from the removal of essential worker compensation in the original HEROES language. Now, that's why we brought up in this conversation the CARES Act money, the $117 million, the remainder amount that the government of Guam is currently holding in reserve, that can still be used for essential worker pay. And so if we're able to get this through on the commonalities, because we have balances that have been unexpended and we really want to send the right message that using those balances is necessary given our circumstances, again, I will encourage the local government to seriously explore deploying the remainder of the $117 million originally provided in the CARES for essential worker compensation, similar to what they're doing in the state of Pennsylvania.
That's my only question. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Charkbalov. Mr. Torres, you are recognized for questions.
Thank you, Congressman. I wanted to follow up on that whole. I think it was Nestor who was talking about the $1.17 billion, and it got me to think: is there anything that would stop that kind of infusion of cash from being applied to our books and essentially creating a major surplus on our books, wiping out the deficit, creating a surplus? Because I know it's sort of what is a very unprecedented thing.
It's possible. I think that we'll have to. I think that with this opportunity, we need to make the most of it. I would encourage pulling in every creative financial mind we have on the island. We probably should even create a task force to be able to look at deploying local resources, local tax breaks, paying down local obligations, and utilizing these federal resources. I mean, man, if you can put together a task force on the local side with the likes of Joe Bradley and Joe Arnett and Gary Hiles and Roseanne Jones, and then also pull in the folks in GITA, pull in the folks in GB, pull in the folks in the public auditor's office even, and really come up with a task force approach on how we can figure out how to maximize these federal resources in order to provide as much relief to our people and wipe out as much, deficit and deferred maintenance as possible. I mean, these are real significant once in a lifetime opportunities that don't get me wrong, this pandemic is a tragedy, but, in times of crisis, we can find opportunity. And that's the hopeful message that we have to communicate to our people. I think it's one of the reasons why there's so much frustration, but we can really show there's light at the end of the tunnel if we just tap into the collective capabilities on our island and make the most of this federal relief in a way that marries local and federal resources with the historic challenges that we've been facing and the very glaring realities that we're dealing with, and the hopes of what we want to build tomorrow. We definitely can put all that together. It really needs to be a Team Guam effort.
Well, hopefully without the Guam legislature and its Christmas tree, but that wasn't part of the question. My question, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. My question on the possible use of some of these funds, Ashley, I'd like your thoughts on any sort of investment into the pension fund in order for us to get that unfunded liability down further, or even a return back to a true pension fund. Do you have any, I know this is all new, but do you have any thoughts on that? I know you're a financial person.
The key to doing that would be to just figuring out how to make it fit within the parameters that we're given. And so if we want to be able to pay down the remaining liability on the retirement fund balance sheet, I know that that's included in the costs of personnel. I know that I've actually, you're opening up old wounds for me, because when I was in the legislature, I always advocated that we need to separate out the funded liability, because it's actually factored into personnel budgets. It's washed into the total figure. But if we actually factored it out, then we'd be able to see what our true personnel costs were and what our actual retirement fund liability costs were. And if we had a clear understanding of the differences in those numbers, then we can make the argument that reduction in government of Guam revenue is first going to affect this unfunded liability, and so we want to use these CARES Act, these coronavirus relief funds in order to pay that, because we don't want to default on that. When you have very, very clear accounting, and you're able to make a case that a certain line item is coming under duress, and the funding from the federal government authorizes us to fill those gaps, then we can fill them. And so it is possible, but we need to have a very clear case as to why, and the numbers need to be incredibly transparent, but it is doable if we're able to make an effective case for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Media partners, I would like to open the second round of questionings if we have anyone else. Mr. Wayne Chargaloff, for questions, you are recognized.
Hello again, Congressman. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. Out of the $2.2 trillion in the bill, about how much total does Guam stand to get from it?
Well, of the amounts that I've described, that already accounts for 3.1 billion, which is almost double what we've received under the CARES Act. But that's a baseline amount. That's the baseline amount, because there's a 10 billion increase in SNAP that Guam is going to be able to avail of on a formulaic basis. There's a lot of big pot appropriations that are going out to pre-existing federal programs that will also be subsequently dispersed on a formulaic basis, and we haven't carved those numbers out just yet, because they're a lot more difficult to carve out, just putting it plainly. I wanted to be able to come and update all of our people on the numbers that we were able to quickly carve out, and particularly in the areas that is on everybody's mind, stimulus, unemployment, PPP, help for education, help for our hospital, help for our government coffers. Those are the immediate figures that we were able to carve out. And of those immediate figures, it's 3.1 billion. But again, that's just a baseline. There's going to be other formulaic federal programs that will have additional monies flowing through to Guam.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman. That looks to have exhausted all our inquiries from our media partners.
Well, I just wanted to close by thanking all of you for making time. Thank you for accommodating us and hopefully passing through this press conference to your listening, viewing, and reading audiences on your respective social media platforms. I know that a lot of people are looking for where the next relief is going to come from, what's the status of it, what's going on. and we wanted to make sure that we provided that information to you on a Guam-specific basis as quickly as possible. I again wanted to thank my territorial colleagues. We do a really good job of targeting broad territorial advocacy in very specific areas, so that we're not all banging on the door for the same thing, but we're banging on the door for things that all of us are going to be able to benefit from. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to my colleague to the north, Cleli Sablan, my colleague Stacy Plaskett in the Virgin Islands, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon in Puerto Rico, and Amata Radawag in American Samoa. They've just been excellent partners in this whole process. I wanted to definitely credit my leadership, our Speaker Nancy Pelosi, our Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, our committee chairs, particularly my chairwoman Maxine Waters on the Financial Services Committee. By being able to stay in touch at the leadership level, it's been completely transformative in keeping the territories included in the legislation. And so this is the package that we have. The package is now going to be going before the House, and we're looking forward to it garnering support. I would like to also put a shout out to our local government and our local counterparts on the Republican Party. Hopefully within the next 24 hours, we'll be shooting out a letter to the Guam legislature, the governor, the Republican Party of Guam, and several of our community advocacy groups, to include the Guam Chamber and the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association. We're going to need your voice to be able to send letters in of support for these for the Guam package, not only on the House side but also on the Senate side. Being able to get those parties on board in advocacy will undoubtedly be a positive thing. And we're grinding it out here, and I'm very excited that we've been able to find something that saves $1 trillion from the original proposal without cutting out the territories. And we're looking forward to this getting through. And we thank all of you for just your patience and for being there for us, because this is a very, very difficult time for all of our people, and we feel it every day, the struggles in our community, and we're doing everything we can to bring you the federal relief that you need to carry us through, at least for the next year, hopefully. Thank you all so much for making the time, and I look forward to seeing you all home when I return home soon. Hopefully we get this thing through and I'll be able to get back. I really would like to. We're targeting maybe by next weekend we'll be able to touch down back on Guam. Miss you guys, and love Guam so much. Thank you.